Welcome back, listeners, to BizBlend. I'm your host, Sana, and today we are diving into a topic that's uncomfortably real for most founders. And this is something which also is personally very, very interesting to me. Why so many of us run on what our guest for today calls it as dirty fuel? Things like fear, self doubt, and guilt, and how they can quietly sabotage sustainable success. And let me introduce my guest to all of you listeners, Andrew Poles. He knows this journey firsthand because he's a 3x founder who has built and scaled multi-million-dollar companies and coached over 10,000 founders, leaders, and teams worldwide. Now, hear me out, including those at NASA, Dell, and Netflix. But Andrew's story, listeners, it's more about than just the business growth. It's more about that shift from grinding yourself down to leading with clarity, purpose, and also confidence. So, if you are a founder or an entrepreneur who's been feeling like you have been pushing harder and harder, but you're never able to catch up, this episode is going to hit home with you. So, Andrew, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Sana. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for that great introduction, and I'm excited for our topic as well.
Oh, definitely. Andrew, now if I look at this from a listener perspective, somebody who will hear it for the first time. Now you have, talk about founders running on dirty fuel, and there's then it constitutes of the fear, self doubt, and guilt. Um, so why do you think? These are all a part of that dirty fuel, and how does this actually look like in day-to-day leadership?
Yeah, I think so. One thing about founders, one thing about executives and leaders in companies is that they're almost always very, very high performing individuals.
Mhm.
Those are the people who tend to excel and gravitate into those roles. And so there is the set of skills and the set of sort of emotional drivers that throughout the course of their life have allowed them to become high performing. And in most people's cases, there is a dirty fuel in that set that we were just talking about. And how this tends to happen, Sana, is that we have experiences early in life that, in some people's cases, could be very, very traumatic physically, sexual trauma, emotional trauma, things that are actually quite, quite horrific. And then in other people's cases, and I fit in this category, the things that happened weren't of that type. They weren't physically traumatic or anything like that. But what happens to us winds up being the same, which is that we wind up taking some experience that happens to us and we interpret its meaning in such a way that we get disconnected from that sense you said of purpose, of wholeness, of balance. So we get left with some experience that we are lacking on some fundamental level. And then that is a very terrifying experience. It's a devastating experience, and then all of us come up with strategies to compensate in life to that experience we have of no longer being whole and complete, of no longer just being okay. And that strategy we come up with becomes one of, 1 to 3 strategies we have that we lean on to succeed in life and to produce results. And that is what I mean by a dirty fuel. It's something that you actually can use to produce results very reliably, but it comes at a huge cost because it came into being as a result of some experience of lack. And so you're trying to make up for an experience of lack, which is fundamentally in your relationship with yourself, in your story about yourself, by producing some result out in the world. And those two things will never connect. So you will never regain that sense of being okay by leaning on a dirty fuel. And that's why it can lead to burnout. So that's all very theoretical. Let me just give you an example or two to make sense of this. So in my own life, uh, it's not an accident that I became a coach. So, an experience that falls in this boat for me, and this one's kind of funny in a way, but I went to a sleepaway camp when I was in my middle school years. And the first year I went to this camp, there was a tradition on Friday nights that everyone would write these notes called Shabbatograms to other people in the camp. And you could send them to family members who were there. You could send them to your counselor. You could send them to your friends and just let people know you were thinking of them, or if you had a love interest or a crush, you could do that as well. And so I sent out a bunch of them. I sent one to my sister, to my best friend, to guys in my cabin, to this girl I had a crush on. I sent out all these Shabbatograms, and I was so excited to see who was thinking of me, who was going to write me. And so when I got back to my cabin later that night to see who I had Shabbatograms from, I had one Shabbatogram, and it was from my sister.
Okay.
So I was about 10 years old. Okay, I was
Mhm.
devastated when I saw the one note and saw it was from my sister. Now, the
Mhm.
interpretation or the story that I made up about that was that nobody was thinking of me.
Mm.
And then I went further and said, I must be different. I must be somehow weird, or I don't fit in because I'm thinking of all these people and I'm sure everyone else is getting spotograms, but the only person thinking about me is my sister. And as a
Mm.
10-year-old, the emotional impact of that on me, not of what happened, but of that interpretation that I came up with to explain what happened, it crushed my little 10-year-old heart. The feeling that nobody saw me or cared or was thinking of me was devastating. And so the strategy that I came up with to compensate for that experience of not fitting in and not being important to people was being helpful. So I knew that if I could help people, they would take an interest in me, right? So it's not an accident that I became a coach professionally. I always wanted to do something that helped people. It wasn't always coaching. But as I was early on in my career, my need to help people so that they would see me and value me always had this undercurrent below it, this emotional undercurrent of threat, of fear that if I didn't have a great call, if I at any point stopped being helpful, they would just drop me like a hot potato. And this didn't just show up in business, it showed up in my early romantic relationships. I always had to be able to, somehow perform for the women I was dating. And that, of course,
Mm.
just kills off intimacy. So it's a very dirty fuel. It made me very successful, but
Mhm.
it really cost me a lot of emotional well-being. It pulled me away from my family, my drive to have to succeed, and I sacrificed time with my daughter when she was young, time with my wife. So I find that almost every single high performing executive that I coach has stories like this that they've never really looked into or dealt with that allow them to be successful on the one hand, but also drive them into an unhealthy mode of performing on the other.
Wow. Well, I really you know uh, loved the fact that the inspiration behind becoming a coach, it kind of, or the trajectory that you chose in your adulthood, it kind of connected way back to a very innocent moment or event in your childhood. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, on one hand, if on one side of the coin, if we see, I mean, everybody appreciates a person who helps everyone, but then at the other end of the coin, it's like, you are helping everyone else out there, but what about yourself? And
Yes.
at first it may sound a bit selfish, but then it's just kind of pouring from an empty vessel.
That's so well said, Sana. And one of the things about that I recently learned new words for was that sacrifice in a relationship doesn't actually work.
Mm.
So if you're in a relationship that's healthy, and in a healthy relationship, one of the things that would be there is that every party to the relationship, whether it's a business partnership, a marriage, whether it's a team of multiple people, if it's a healthy relationship, everyone wants everybody to win, and nobody wants to lose, or no one wants anyone else to lose. So
Mm.
if the only way that you can win is by me losing, then that ultimately doesn't work. So self-sacrifice doesn't actually work. What works is to build relationships where everybody wins. And when you're driven by these dirty fuels, you won't seek that out because that doesn't make sense in the logic of, and if you look at my case, it doesn't make sense because the only way I could win, would be for people to see me. But in my logic system, people can't see me and they can't appreciate me unless I'm doing something for them. So I need people to need me. That's not a healthy relationship.
Mm,
So the sacrificing doesn't actually work. Like you said, an empty vessel has nothing to offer.
yeah, that is true.
So I guess one question could be for the people who are listening, and you can tell me if this is what you want to explore. But I think if someone starts to get this, then the question becomes, well, what do I do with this? I mean,
Yeah.
okay, that all makes sense, and I can relate to his story, but what do I do with that? Maybe we should explore that.
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. We'll come to that, Andrew. Of course, we'll talk about solutions or the way forward. But first of all, the hardest part is realizing this fact. Now let's say uh, listeners, somebody who is a founder and entrepreneur among the listeners, they may connect with the story, but most of the times, and we have observed, I have personally experienced this, that the trickiest part is that we don't even realize, and especially for a
Yes.
founder who is completely, it's kind of business is running them. They're always available for everyone, for the business. It's how do you convince them, especially when they're in survival mode, that slowing down isn't going to tank their business, focusing on themselves isn't going to affect their business.
Well, I think that is a challenging thing for founders, and I think one of the reasons why that is the case is because one of the challenges of being a founder, which is also true of being a CEO, even when you're not the founder of a business, is that every single thing rolls up to you, and you are ultimately accountable for the success or lack of success of the business. And so, in that sort of situation, it's so easy for people to experience the responsibility of that inside the belief and the framework that I have to do every single thing that it is possible to do to make sure that this doesn't fail or to make sure that this succeeds. And that very easily leads to driving yourself into the ground and overworking. So I
Mhm.
think it's a very natural pull when you are a founder and when you are a CEO, whether you are a founder or not. And I'm not saying it's not also a natural pull for other positions of accountability. I think it would be for any position of accountability that you take very seriously. So, um, I think the one of the tricks to this is that first off, you have to confront that you are never going to get everything done.
Mm.
And that's a lie that we tell ourselves. That we will, that we'll get it, that if we just work harder, if we just work longer, if we just keep grinding away, that we will at some point we'll get it all done. We'll at least get so close to enough of everything done that we will somehow stave off failure. And the truth is that you will never get it all done.
Mm.
And that's not like some kind of, I don't know, powerful perspective. That is mathematical. So if you took and made a list of every single thing you're thinking about that you want to do, and next
Mhm.
to that list, you put down how much time it takes to do that thing.
Mhm.
And then you include on your list that it takes time to transition from thing to thing, to drive here or there. It takes time to buy food, to cook food, to eat food. Takes time to sleep. We all need sleep. If you do the math, what you see is that there isn't time to get it all done. Now it's if you don't accept that fact, and that is a fact, if you don't accept that fact, then you're gonna live your whole life based on a lie that you tell yourself. And that's another form of dirty fuel, right? You tell yourself that you really, even if you don't say it out loud, even if you're not even fully aware of it, to even consider that you're going to somehow get it all done is a lie you tell yourself to get yourself to keep on working. So
Mm.
that automatically will lead you to being out of balance. And that brings up this whole topic of balance. I think this topic of balance is really is badly understood, son, and I think it's important for us to just touch on it briefly to answer
Yeah,
your
good.
question, because I think people relate to this thing of balance like the scales of justice, or like the scales in a, I don't know, in the grocery store, where if you had, like, food on one side and weights on the other, you're trying to get them to balance, that once you reach it, it just sits there and it's perfectly balanced. Or like if you took a pencil and balanced it on your finger, when you find the balance point, it just sits there and it's a static thing. But that's not how balance works. Balance is fluid, especially for people who are in very demanding roles, like founders and CEOs. So what
Mm,
what what is balanced for you on one day is not going to be the same thing that is balanced for you on another day.
mm,
There are going to be days when you can work harder and work longer and still achieve a sense of balance in your life, and there are gonna be other days when you can't work that long or that hard because your body, your brain, your emotional state needs something else. So I think one thing to get is you're never gonna get it all done. The second thing to get is balance isn't static, it's fluid.
mhm.
But if you think about how balance works, human beings can move incredibly heavy objects if they put them on a balance point.
Yeah.
If they're on a balance point, they're very easy to move around. If they're out of balance, they take a tremendous amount of energy to move or to prevent from falling, etc. So,
Yeah.
one of the ways I work with founders is to have them get that what they're looking for ultimately is, at the end of the day, or what I call net net. At the end of it all, when you do all the adding and subtracting, you get your
Mhm.
optimal performance. You get your optimal output.
Mm.
And so part of generating optimal output is you have to understand that you are a system. As a human being, you're a system. And as a system, you have functional needs, like your car needs gas and the tires need air, etc. If you're in a Formula 1 race, Formula 1, or if you look at the Tour de France and cycling or any high performance sport like that, if you
Mhm.
have a tire that's a little bit flat, can you run the race? Sure.
Oh,
You'll make it to
yes.
the end, but you absolutely won't win.
Mm.
The car that wins is the one that makes the pit stop,
So true.
replaces the tires, and gets back on the track, and then performs at a
Mhm.
higher level. So you
Mm.
have to think about performance as an executive that way and understand what are the inputs and outputs you need to balance each day to perform optimally. And that tends to help founders deal with this thing about slowing down, because slowing down in a pit stop is a way of speeding up in the end. So you have to slow down in order to speed up. And I think that makes that more palatable.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think that really makes it easy to, kind of get that sense immediately because it's very simple and obvious in there. Um, and then, as you were mentioning about the solutions, now any specific, steps could be small steps that, someone can take to actually, uh, make that transition or leave from just being, a doer to kind of, thinking, becoming a CEO.
Yes. I think of it as including, two or three key moves that people need to make.
Okay.
So one of them is appreciating that you as a CEO or you as a founder in your business are
Mhm.
like a flywheel. You are two interconnected gears. And when the gear that is you slows down or stops, then the business's gear also stops. So it's a flywheel.
Mhm.
And the converse is also true. The faster you spin and the more efficiently you spin, the faster the business can grow and develop. So your growth and the business's growth arise together.
Mhm.
So what does it take for you then to kind of optimize your part in that? Well, one thing is you have to realize that all of us as human beings have, like we started with, these unexamined stories that we came up with early in life that are driving our point of view and the way we experience situations and the ways in which we engage with those situations that have us burn dirty fuel. So you just have to realize that. And you actually have to go to work on discovering what those are and then dealing with them in a way that they kind of release their grip on you. And, there are multiple modalities that work with that. Um, Therapy works for some people, coaching works for some people, but in everything I've seen, it takes engaging with someone else or some group setting in some way to get outside. People say it's very difficult to read the label on the outside of your box. So it usually takes the participation of another person to help you get there. So I highly recommend founders get supported in that way. Be in a founder support group, be in a coaching group, do therapy, do something that helps you read the label on the outside of your box where it comes to those kinds of things. So that's one lever you can pull.
Mhm.
Then the second one is, and this one is something that you can do on your own if you do a little bit of learning about this,
Okay.
but unexperienced emotions also grind up the gears, muck up the gears.
Okay.
So, for example, Sana, founders tend to deal a lot with fear of failure, and we can tend to catastrophize
Yes.
events. Something happens, you lose a client, um, you lose a key employee, or you're
Mhm.
afraid you're going to lose a client or key employee, and it comes with a tremendous amount of fear. And what most of us try to do when that emotion shows up is to somehow fix it so we don't have to feel it.
Hmm.
So we try to give the employee more stock. We try to cajole the client to come back. We try to go find another client real quick. And I'm not saying, by the way, that trying to retain your employee or take on a new client isn't a smart thing to do. But if you don't deal with actually experiencing the emotion that's happening, which sometimes means confronting, okay, well, what would it feel like if the worst case happened? And this is a very old tradition. This is
Okay.
you find this in Tibet, in the Tibetan traditions of trying to experience one's death before it happens and things of that nature. But to allow yourself to experience the thing that you most fear and to let it in without trying to change it, without trying to tell yourself a different story about it, arguing with the story around it, or agreeing with the story, to just literally experience it in your body. When you do that, you get to the other side of the emotion relatively quickly. And what you find is on the other side of the emotion, you have a new mental clarity about what to do about the actual circumstance. So, disconnecting from your emotions, resisting your emotions, buying into the lie we were all told that emotions have no place in business, those are all counterproductive. They actually make you less productive and burn a lot of unnecessary energy. So, the second thing you can do is learn, train yourself, and there's lots of free information out there on how to do this, on how to experience your emotions fully. And when you do that, then you will be way less driven to try to work yourself to the bone to avoid experiences that you find unpleasant. So that's the second tool. The third tool is a completely different kind of tool, and this is one that I call structure. And this one, again, is one that you can learn um, through study or with someone else. But
Okay.
the other reason why most founders overwork is because they haven't actually set up the appropriate kinds of structures around them to manage the massive amount of work that they need to engage with, the promises that they make, the deadlines, the timelines. Many founders try to do this either from memory, trying to remember things to do. And memory, by the way, includes things like checklists and sticky notes. People think that if they put it on a list or they put it on a sticky note, that somehow it takes it out of their memory, but it doesn't. Because why? You still have to remember to look at the sticky note. You have to remember to act on the sticky note. You have to remember to look at the list, right? So you have to have a system that takes 100% of everything you need to do out of memory and puts it into something like your calendar, where all you have to do is look at your calendar and do what it says to do next, and do what it says to do next, and do what it says to do next. And when you do that, when you do those three things, when you deal with those stories and you learn how to really process your emotions, and then you get set up structurally so you know exactly what you're going to do today, no more, no less, then it is possible every day to work towards very close to what you could consider an ideal level of balance. when you really confront, okay, well, I do need to exercise. Well, how long does that take? And when am I doing that? And I do need to eat. When am I doing that? And I need to spend time with my husband or my wife. When am I doing that? And when that all goes in there and you can say, okay, I've got it all covered here. It's not that you don't have breakdowns and things like that, because we do, but you no longer work from the lie that if you just go harder and you just go faster, somehow it'll all work out. That's a lie. So that was a lot. But if you want the nitty gritty, those are the top 3 things I work with founders on that completely flips this for them and allows them to produce at an even higher level. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to complete that thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you for sharing these three, and Andrew, especially the second one. I mean, y- this observation is so right. I mean, because um, and it's not only for founders and entrepreneurs. Often, we do not want to actually face the anxiety or the fear. We just want to fix it and
Yeah.
deal with it, and just get on, move on with it.
Yeah.
So I think the second one to me personally is so much relevant and important. Of course, all the three are absolutely essential for founders and entrepreneurs. And also, do you believe, Andrew, that there has to be some dedicated time or day for doing self reflection or self introspection? That, let's say I am. As a founder, I'm looking at my calendar and I'm trying to understand how much percentage of my day, or how many number of hours goes into this particular function, and then how much time I'm dedicating to my personal life, to my family. Do you think there should be some dedicated days for such kind of self reflection?
Yes, I do, and I actually recommend that people do this for a little bit every day. And why that is, Sana, is because um, I think anyone who says that um, you can build something really meaningful, build a company, etc., without sacrifice. And I want to define that just so we're on the same page. But it says you can do that without sacrificing anything is telling you a lie. So, and what I mean by sacrifice really is that there are probably going to be times when you wish you could spend 24 hours in your day on your business and you could also spend the same 24 hours with the people you love. You would love to be able to do both, and you can't do both. And so all I mean by sacrifice is really another way of saying you have to prioritize what you are going to do and what you're not going to do. And if you don't take the time to really think about it, which I didn't do for many years, and instead what you will most likely do is react to what you are feeling emotionally. Oh my God, I'm afraid that I'm going to lose this opportunity. And then you will go and work really hard, regardless of the cost, to not lose that opportunity without having given it any real thought. Then what happens, and this is something, as I said, I lived through, is that you will look back and have regret about the meaningful things that you missed. So you can have, in my way of using the term sacrifice, and I don't love that word, so there's probably a better word, and you can help me if you can think of one, but you have to make trade-offs with your time. So
Mhm.
you wanna do that very thoughtfully, though, so that the other thing is that you get to choose where that line sits. You get to choose what you're gonna do with the limited time that you have, and that does require self-reflection. Is this really important? Is this event with my child important to me? Is this something I would regret if I missed? Great, I'm gonna do it, and then I'm gonna figure out what to do with this other thing with my business. And if you don't actually do that kind of self-reflection, including learning how to see your emotional reactions for what they are, instead of just reacting to your own emotions, instead of dealing with reality, you will never experience being whole or having balance or being in charge of your life. You will always be a victim of the demands of your business. And that is a really horrible way to go through life, in my opinion.
Oh, hey, so Andrew, if our listeners they would like to connect with you, what would be the best way?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So people can connect with me on my LinkedIn profile, which is just LinkedIn/Andrew Poles. And they can also connect with me on my website where there is a communication or send a message area on the landing page, and that's just andrewpoles.com. I'm very active both places.
Awesome. I'll make sure to mention all the links in the show notes. And Andrew, this was such an enriching conversation. Um, and I mean, these are battle tested perspectives. So I'm really thankful to you for sharing this with all of us.
Well, I appreciate the incredible work you guys do at BizBlend. Thank you for that acknowledgement. I totally received that. I appreciate it, and I listened to some of your shows, and I think you guys do great work. And I'm glad that I could be one of your interviewees and contribute to your listeners. I love founders. I love builders. I love the dreamers. I serve the dreamers and their dreams. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. That is so thoughtful, Andrew. And thank you to all the listeners out there for tuning into BizBlend. Um, and don't forget to follow the show and share this episode with a fellow founder who could use a mindset reset right now. Until then, see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.